The message arrived at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. Ambassador Vance was sleeping in her small apartment on the diplomatic station when her personal device screamed with an emergency alert. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling for a moment. In her 20 years of service, she had never received a Priority 1 summons. Not once. She sat up and read the message. The words were simple, but their meaning was heavy. The Galactic Council demanded her presence in the Grand Chamber, immediately. No explanation, no context, just a command wrapped in the polite language of diplomacy. Was 53 years old. Her hair had turned gray at the temples, and lines had formed around her eyes from years of forced smiles and careful words. She had spent her entire adult life representing humanity among species that looked at her people the way humans once looked at insects. Interesting, perhaps. Worthy of study, maybe, but never equal, never respected. She dressed in her formal uniform. The dark blue fabric was simple compared to the flowing robes and crystalline armor worn by the elder species. Humans had learned long ago that trying to match the aliens in appearance only invited more mockery. Better to be plain. Better to be forgettable. That was the strategy that had kept humanity alive for 200 years. The transport pod carried her through the vast structure of Nexus Prime. The station was older than human civilization. It had been built by the Dominion when humanity's ancestors were still learning to farm. The corridors stretched for thousands of kilometers, filled with species from across the galaxy. Most of them ignored as she passed. A few gave her looks of curiosity or contempt. One group clicked their mandibles in what she knew was laughter. She kept her eyes forward and her face calm. She had learned to swallow her pride long ago. The Grand Chamber was the heart of the Galactic Council. It was a massive dome that could hold representatives from all 47 elder species. The ceiling displayed a real-time image of the galaxy, billions of stars spinning slowly overhead. Had been here many times, always standing in the outer ring where the probationary species were allowed to observe but rarely to speak. Today was different. Today, a path had been cleared to the central platform. Walked forward, feeling the eyes of thousands upon her. The elder species sat in their designated sections, arranged by the age of their civilizations. The oldest and most powerful sat closest to the center. The Dominion occupied the prime position, their crystalline bodies catching the light and scattering it into rainbows. High Arbiter stood at the very center. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, and his body was made of living crystal that had grown and refined itself over 12,000 years of life. He was the oldest member of the council, and his word was law. When he spoke, galaxies listened. Stopped at the edge of the central platform and bowed her head slightly, not too deep. Humans had learned that showing too much submission only encouraged abuse. Ambassador Vance said. His voice resonated through the chamber like music played on glass. You have been summoned to address concerns of the highest importance. I am honored to serve the council, replied. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she spoke them anyway. Concerns have been raised, continued, regarding humanity's activities in the Outer Rim territories. Our observers have detected unusual energy signatures. Construction activities on a massive scale, movement of resources that do not match your species' declared capabilities. Kept her expression neutral. Inside, her heart was beating faster. The council requires an explanation, said. What is humanity building in the darkness between stars? Had prepared for this moment, not specifically but generally. She knew that someday the council would notice. Someday, questions would be asked. She had rehearsed a dozen different responses, each designed to buy time. High Arbiter, she said carefully, humanity has always sought to improve itself. We are expanding our mining operations to support our growing population. Nothing more. A sound rippled through the chamber. It might have been laughter. The aquatic beings who communicated through bioluminescent patterns flashed colors that knew meant mockery. The clicked and hissed. Even the usually stoic seemed to shimmer with amusement. "Mining operations," repeated. "Ambassador, do you take us for fools?" "Never, High Arbiter." "Then do not insult us with obvious lies." His voice hardened. The rainbow light from his body shifted toward red. "Our sensors have detected gravitational anomalies consistent with singularity manipulation. Energy outputs that exceed your civilization's total capacity by a factor of thousands. These are not mining operations. These are weapons." Said nothing. There was nothing to say. "The Council has deliberated," announced. "Humanity is hereby ordered to submit to a full military audit. All construction in the Outer Rim will cease immediately. All vessels will be inspected. All facilities will be open to Council observers." "And if we refuse?" asked quietly. The chamber fell silent. No probationary species had ever refused a Council directive. The question itself was almost unthinkable. Stared at her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "Then humanity will face corrective integration. Your species will be relocated to supervised territories. Your technology will be confiscated. Your leaders will be replaced with Council-appointed administrators. This is not a threat, Ambassador. This is simply what happens to species that do not know their place." Felt the weight of those words. Corrective integration was a polite term for conquest. A dozen species had faced it over the. Some had been absorbed completely, their cultures erased, their identities forgotten. Others had been reduced to servant races, existing only to serve the elder species that had corrected them. Humanity had spent 200 years trying to avoid that fate. 200 years of bowing and scraping and pretending to be less than they were. 200 years of secret work in the darkness, building something that would ensure it never happened. "High Arbiter," said slowly, "I must consult with my government before responding to such a significant demand. I request time to communicate with Earth." Considered this. Around him, the other elder species shifted and murmured. Granting time to a probationary species was unusual, but refusing would make the Council appear unreasonable, and the valued their image of benevolent rulers. 30 standard rotations, declared. "You have 30 rotations to comply with the Council's directive. After that, corrective integration will begin. The fleet will enforce the Council's will." "I understand," said. "Thank you for your patience." She bowed again and turned to leave. As she walked back through the chamber, she heard the whispers and clicks and flashes of the elder species discussing humanity's fate. They were already dividing up Earth's colonies, she knew, already deciding which species would get which resources. In their minds, the matter was settled. Humanity would submit or be crushed. There was no third option. They had no idea how wrong they were. Returned to her apartment and activated her secure communication system. The encryption was human-made, using principles that the elder species had declared impossible. It would take the Council's best code breakers 1,000 years to decode a single message. By then, it would not matter. She composed her message carefully. The words had been agreed upon decades ago, passed down from ambassador to ambassador like a sacred trust. 3 words that would change everything. She typed them slowly, "Wake the fleet." Then she pressed send and sat back in her chair. Outside her window, the stars turned slowly, indifferent to the events unfolding among the tiny creatures who lived between them. Far away, in a region of space where no light reached, the message arrived at a station that did not exist on any map. Admiral was 60 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. His father had served in the same project. His grandfather had helped design it. 3 generations of his family had devoted themselves to a single goal, ensuring that humanity would never kneel. Read the message and felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that the waiting was over, fear of what was to come, pride in what his species had accomplished, and underneath it all, a cold determination that had been forged over 2 centuries of humiliation. He walked to the observation deck of the station and looked out at the fleet. 200 vessels hung in the absolute darkness, visible only because they blocked out the distant stars behind them. They were not like any ships the galaxy had ever seen. They did not shine or gleam or display the technological pride of their builders. They were shadows given form, holes in reality, weapons that should not exist. The dark matter fleet, humanity's answer to a universe that had told them they were nothing, had studied the history of the project. He knew the names of the scientists who had died in the early experiments, consumed by forces they barely understood. He knew about the stations that had vanished when singularities collapsed unexpectedly. He knew the cost of every breakthrough, measured in human lives and human grief. But he also knew why they had paid that cost. The Council thought humanity was weak. They thought humans were clever animals who had stumbled into space through luck rather than skill. They thought that their 12,000 years of dominance made them invincible. They were wrong. Activated the fleet-wide communication system. His voice reached every ship, every station, every human soul who had devoted their lives to this secret war. "This is Admiral," he said. "The Council has given us an ultimatum. They expect us to submit. They expect us to kneel. They expect us to accept our place as their servants." He paused, letting the words sink in. "They don't know what we've built. They don't know what we're capable of. For 200 years, we have hidden in the shadows, preparing for this moment. We have sacrificed everything to give our children a future free from the contempt of species who see us as nothing more than insects." His voice hardened. "Those days are over. We will not submit. We will not kneel. We will show the galaxy what humanity can do when it refuses to accept the impossible. We will teach them that the species they dismissed as primitive and weak has built weapons that their greatest minds said could never exist." Looked out at the fleet one last time. The ships were stirring now, their crews preparing for what was to come. "Wake the fleet," he commanded. "All vessels begin departure sequence. We move in 48 hours." Across the hidden stations of the void territories, humanity prepared for war. Not a war of conquest, but a war of recognition. Not a war for resources, but a war for respect. They had spent 2 centuries building their strength in secret. Now, they would reveal it to a galaxy that had never taken them seriously. The elder species believed they were gods. They believed their power was absolute and eternal. They believed that nothing could challenge their dominance. They were about to learn the truth. In the depths of space, humanity's dark matter warships began to move. Their engines made no sound. Their hulls reflected no light. They slipped through the void like ghosts, carrying the hopes and dreams of a species that refused to be forgotten. The galaxy was about to change forever. And it all began with 3 simple words: wake the fleet. The Council's private chambers were filled with beings who had ruled the galaxy for longer than most species had existed. They gathered in small groups, their conversations hidden behind barriers of light and sound that kept secrets from prying ears. But all of them discussed the same thing: humanity. High Arbiter stood before a massive display that showed the known regions of human space. Small red dots marked the suspicious activities in the outer rim. Even now, his analysts could not determine exactly what the humans were building. The energy signatures were wrong. The gravitational readings made no sense. It was as if the humans had somehow broken the fundamental laws of physics. Impossible, of course. Humans were clever, but they were children compared to the elder races. Their entire civilization was barely 10,000 years old. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still painting pictures on cave walls. "They will comply," said Al, one of senior advisors. His crystalline body was smaller than the High Arbiter's, but his mind was sharp. "They have no choice. Our fleet could destroy their entire civilization in a matter of weeks." "Perhaps," replied, "but something troubles me. The ambassador showed no fear. When I threatened corrective integration, she did not beg or plead. She simply asked for time. A delay tactic. Humans are known for their stubbornness. Stubbornness and stupidity are not the same thing. Turned away from the display. The humans know they cannot defeat us in open war. Every species in the galaxy knows this. So why did Ambassador Vance seem so calm? Al had no answer. In another section of the station, the delegation was celebrating. Their bodies clicked and buzzed with excitement as they discussed the coming conquest. General, the commander of the military forces, raised a ceremonial cup filled with fermented nectar. To humanity, he said, his mandibles spreading in what passed for a smile among his species. May their brief existence serve as a lesson to other young species who forget their place. The other clicked in agreement. They had been part of the council for 50,000 years, and they had seen many probationary species rise and fall. Humans were no different. Perhaps a bit more creative than most, but creativity meant nothing against the combined military might of the elder races. I have already claimed 3 of their colony worlds, said Admiral Al, second in command. Rich in minerals and close to our trade routes, the Council has approved my claim. They are taking Earth itself, another officer noted. They say they want to study the humans' home world, to understand how such a primitive species developed space travel so quickly. Let them study, said dismissively. I am more interested in the humans' industrial capacity. They breed quickly and work hard. They will make acceptable laborers once they have been properly corrected. They laughed at this. The sound was harsh and unpleasant, like metal scraping against metal. Far below the council chambers, in the workers' section of Nexus Prime, they gathered in their water-filled habitat. They were graceful creatures, their bodies designed for the deep oceans of their home world. Bioluminescent patterns flickered across their skin as they communicated. The humans are interesting, said Scholar, one of the leading scientists. His body pulsed with soft blue light as he spoke. They have accomplished things that should not be possible for a species so young. Luck, replied Admiral, the military leader of the delegation. Nothing more. They stumbled upon fusion technology and managed not to destroy themselves, but their science is primitive compared to ours. And yet they have done something in the outer rim that we cannot explain. Patterns shifted to a thoughtful green. The gravitational readings suggest they have found a way to manipulate dark matter. Our own scientists abandoned that research ago. The mathematics proved it impossible. Then the readings must be wrong, flashed Red with irritation. Humans cannot do what the greatest minds of 47 species have failed to achieve. It is absurd. Many things were once considered absurd, said quietly, until someone did them anyway. But was not listening. Like most of the elder species, he had already decided what the truth was. Humans were inferior. Whatever they were building in the outer rim was irrelevant. The Council's fleet would crush them, and that would be the end of it. Meanwhile, Ambassador Vance played her part perfectly. She attended diplomatic functions with a nervous smile. She answered questions with vague assurances that humanity wanted only peace. She allowed the other species to see exactly what they expected to see, a frightened representative of a doomed civilization. It was a performance she had practiced her entire life. In private, received regular updates from Earth. The fleet was mobilizing. The ships were being powered up. 200 years of preparation was coming to its conclusion, but she could not show even a hint of this on her face. One wrong expression, one moment of confidence, and the elder species might realize something was wrong. So she bowed and scraped and pretended to be afraid, and she counted the days until the truth would be revealed. In the Void Territories, Admiral walked through the corridors of the UES Prometheus, the flagship of the Dark Matter Fleet. The ship was massive, nearly 5 kilometers long, but its true size was impossible to judge. The hull was made of a material that absorbed all light. Standing next to it was like standing next to a hole in space itself. Had served aboard many ships in his career, but the Prometheus was different. It was not just a vessel, it was a statement, a declaration that humanity would not accept the limits imposed by others. He entered the command center, where his senior officers were reviewing the final preparations. Captain Sarah looked up from her console and nodded. "All systems are operational, Admiral. The fleet is ready to move on your command." "What about the new crew members?" asked. "Are they prepared for what they're about to see?" "As prepared as anyone can be." His expression was serious. "Most of them have only heard stories about what these ships can do. Seeing it for the first time will be difficult." "Understood." The dark matter weapons did not simply destroy their targets. They erased them from existence. Ships caught in the beam did not explode or burn. They simply ceased to be, as if they had never existed at all. It was a terrible power, and using it would change everyone who witnessed it. But there was no other choice. The Council had made that clear. "Walk with me," said two. They left the command center and moved through the ship's corridors. Crew members saluted as they passed. Their faces showed a mix of fear and determination. "Do you know the history of this project?" asked. "The basics," replied. "Project Prometheus started 200 years ago, right after first contact." "Do you know why it was started?" Hesitated. "To develop weapons that could match the elder species." "That's part of it." Stopped by a viewport that looked out into the darkness. "But the real reason was simpler. It was started because of what happened to the—" The name hung in the air between them. There had been a young species, like humanity. They had discovered space travel a few centuries before humans did. When they encountered the Galactic Council, they had been excited. They believed they were joining a community of equals. They were wrong. They had developed a new form of energy production that threatened to make the elder species' technology obsolete. Instead of welcoming this innovation, the Council declared it dangerous. They demanded they destroy their research. When they refused, the Council enacted corrective integration. Within a generation they were gone. Not dead exactly. They still existed, scattered across Council space as servants and laborers, but their culture was erased. Their history was forbidden. Their achievements were credited to the elder species who had corrected them. When humanity's leaders learned what happened to the continued, they realized something important. The Council does not tolerate equals. They do not allow younger species to develop technology that might challenge their dominance. Any species that shows too much potential is either absorbed or destroyed. "So they started Project Prometheus," said. "Yes, they chose dark matter because it was the one area where the elder species had failed. They spent 10,000 years trying to harness it. They devoted entire generations of scientists to the problem. Every elder species attempted it at some point, and every single one of them failed. But we didn't." "No," his voice was quiet but proud. "We didn't. It took us 200 years and cost us more than I can describe. Scientists who died in experiments that went wrong. Research stations that vanished when singularities became unstable. Families who lost fathers and mothers and children to a project they could never speak about." He turned to face directly. "The elder species think they failed because the mathematics were wrong. They think dark matter cannot be harnessed because the universe does not allow it. But that's not why they failed." "Then why?" "They failed because they gave up. When the experiments became too dangerous, they stopped. When the cost became too high, they quit. They had everything they needed to solve the problem, but they did not have the one thing that humans have always had." "What's that?" Smiled grimly. "The willingness to sacrifice everything for a goal that matters. The elder species are old and comfortable. They have ruled the galaxy for so long that they have forgotten what it means to struggle. They have forgotten what it means to want something so badly that you will die for it." "Humans haven't forgotten," said. No, we haven't. And that's why we're here, standing in a ship that every other species in the galaxy said was impossible. Because we refuse to accept that word. Because we refuse to stop trying. In the days that followed, the dark matter fleet continued its preparations. Engineers ran final checks on systems that bent the laws of physics. Pilots trained in simulators that could never truly prepare them for what was to come. Soldiers reviewed their orders and made peace with their families through encrypted messages. Everyone understood what was at stake. If they succeeded, humanity would earn its place in the galaxy. If they failed, their species would face the same fate as the. There was no middle ground, no room for compromise. Back on Nexus Prime, Ambassador Vance received reports that the war fleet had begun moving toward human space. 10,000 vessels, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever officially built. They were confident of victory. They expected no real resistance. Read the reports and felt a strange calm settle over her. The waiting was almost over. Soon, the galaxy would learn what humanity had built in the shadows. Soon, the elder species would understand that they had made a terrible mistake. She looked out her window at the stars and whispered words that her grandfather had taught her. Words that had been passed down through generations of human diplomats who had smiled and bowed, while their people prepared for this moment. We are small, we are young, we are nothing in your eyes, but we are not afraid, and we are not finished. The fleet drew closer. The deadline approached, and in the darkness between stars, 200 impossible ships waited for the order to reveal themselves. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity was not what it seemed. The arrogance of the ancients was about to meet the determination of a species that had nothing left to lose. And nothing would ever be the same again. The war fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 10,000 vessels spread across the darkness like a glittering net of light. Crystalline hulls caught the distant starlight and scattered it into rainbows. Weapon arrays hummed with power that could crack planets. Shield generators created barriers that had never been broken in 12,000 years of galactic warfare. Fleet commander and stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Light. He was ancient even by standards, his crystalline body refined by 8,000 years of existence. He had commanded fleets against a dozen rebellious species. He had crushed uprisings that threatened council stability. He had never lost a battle. Today would be no different. Status report, he commanded. All vessels in position, his tactical officer replied. Human defenses detected along the border, approximately 300 vessels, fusion-powered, conventional weapons, and made a sound that was the equivalent of a laugh. 300 ships against 10,000. Do they hope to slow us down, or is this their idea of a joke? Unknown, Commander. The humans have not responded to our communications. Then they choose death over submission, and felt no sympathy. He had seen this pattern before. Young species sometimes preferred extinction to humiliation. It was foolish, but he understood the impulse. Pride was a powerful thing, even in inferior beings. Advance the fleet, destroy their defensive line. We will be at Earth within a week. The fleet began to move. Massive warships glided forward with the grace of predators approaching prey. Smaller vessels spread out to cover the flanks. It was a standard formation, practiced over, designed to overwhelm any opposition through sheer numbers and firepower. The human defensive line did not move. 300 vessels hung in space, waiting. Their weapons were powered up, their shields active, but they made no aggressive moves. They simply watched as the greatest fleet in the galaxy approached. On the bridge of the human flagship Defiance, Captain gripped the arms of his command chair. His ship was old and small compared to the approaching enemy. His weapons could barely scratch shields. His crew knew they were going to die. But they also knew something that did not. They're almost in position, his sensor officer reported. Hold steady, replied. Wait for the signal. The fleet crossed an invisible line in space. Nothing marked it. No sensor would detect it. But on 200 ships hidden in the darkness behind the human defensive line, alarms began to sound. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and watched the approaching enemy. They were beautiful, he had to admit. Their ships gleamed like jewels against the black velvet of space. They radiated power and confidence and the certainty of victory. They had no idea what was about to happen. "All ships report ready," Captain announced. "Time to," said quietly. He pressed a button on his command console. His voice echoed across 200 vessels. "This is Admiral. All ships, disengage concealment fields. Let them see what humanity has built." In the void behind the human defensive line, reality began to change. Patches of space that had been empty suddenly became something else. Not ships exactly. Ships would have reflected light. Ships would have appeared on sensors. Ships would have made sense. These were different. The dark matter fleet appeared as absence rather than presence. Where there should have been stars, there was nothing. Where light should have traveled, it simply stopped. 200 vessels hung in space like holes cut into the fabric of existence itself. On the eternal light, alarms screamed. Tactical displays flickered and went mad. Officers shouted in confusion. "Commander," the sensor officer cried. "New contacts detected, 200 vessels behind the human line." "Impossible," and said. "We scanned that region, there was nothing there." "There was nothing there, Commander, now there is." The officer's voice was shaking. "But our sensors cannot identify them. They're not reflecting any radiation. They're not emitting any energy signatures. According to our instruments, they don't exist, but I can see them. I can see them with my own eyes." And turned to the main. What he saw there made his ancient heart freeze. The human ships were wrong. They did not belong in normal space. They were tears in reality, wounds in the universe itself. Looking at them caused pain somewhere deep in his consciousness. They violated everything he understood about physics and technology and the way the cosmos worked. "What are those things?" he whispered. No one answered, no one knew. On the Prometheus, Admiral opened a communication channel to the flagship. His voice was calm and steady. "This is Admiral of the United Earth Stellar Command. Your fleet has entered human sovereign space without permission. You have 30 seconds to reverse course, or we will demonstrate the consequences." And's response was automatic. 8,000 years of superiority could not be erased by strange ships and impossible sensors readings. "Human, you are outnumbered 50-1. Whatever tricks you are playing with your sensors will not save you. Surrender now, and some of your species may survive to serve the Council." Smiled, it was not a pleasant expression. "You were warned." He nodded too, who relayed the order to the fleet. "All ships target the enemy center formation. Fire at will." The UES Event Horizon, a dark matter destroyer positioned at the front of the human fleet, was the first to fire. Its weapon was not a beam or a missile or anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was a concentrated stream of dark matter, accelerated to near-light speed and focused into a coherent projection. The beam touched the fleet. 50 warships vanished. Not exploded, not destroyed, vanished. One moment they existed, crystalline hulls gleaming with ancient power. The next moment they were simply gone, no debris, no energy release, no dying screams from crew members. They had been erased from existence as thoroughly as if they had never been built. The fleet recoiled in horror. Ships that had held formation broke apart in chaos. Commanders shouted contradictory orders. Sensors that had worked perfectly for thousands of years showed nothing but static where their companions had been. On the eternal light and watched his in disbelief. The 50 ships that had vanished included 3 of his senior officers, friends he had known for centuries, veterans of 100 campaigns, gone in an instant without even a chance to fight back. "Commander orders." his tactical officer screamed. En's mind raced. In 8,000 years of warfare, he had never seen anything like this. The weapons humanity had deployed were not just powerful, they were wrong. They should not exist. The physics that governed the universe should not allow them. But they existed anyway, and they worked. "Concentrate fire on the nearest human vessel," he ordered. "All ships, target the enemy flagship and destroy it." The fleet obeyed. Thousands of weapons turned toward the Prometheus, energy beams that could melt asteroids, missiles that could crack planetary crusts. The combined firepower of 10,000 ships focused on a single target. The weapons fired, and nothing happened. The Prometheus did not dodge. It did not raise shields. It simply sat in space while thousands of attacks converged on its position. The weapons reached the ship and disappeared. They were absorbed by the hull, swallowed by darkness, erased from existence just like the vanished vessels. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Admiral watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The enemy had just thrown everything they had at his ship, and none of it had mattered. "Return fire," he said. "All ships engage at will." The dark matter fleet opened fire. The battle was not a battle. It was an execution. Vessels vanished by the hundreds. Their shields meant nothing. Their weapons meant nothing. 12,000 years of technological advancement meant nothing against weapons that did not obey the same rules. Fleet commander and watched his fleet die around him. Ships he had commanded for centuries blinked out of existence. Officers he had trained and promoted and trusted disappeared without a trace. The greatest military force in the galaxy was being erased from reality, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Commander," his communications officer said, "the human admiral is broadcasting again." His voice filled the bridge. "This is Admiral. You have lost 3,000 vessels in the last hour. You will lose more unless you withdraw. I say again, reverse course and leave human space immediately. There will be no further warnings." And stared at the impossible ships hung in space, their dark hulls absorbing all light, all hope, all the certainty he had carried for 8,000 years. He had never retreated, never admitted defeat, never faced an enemy he could not destroy. But he had also never faced an enemy who could rewrite the rules of reality itself. "All ships," he said slowly, "reverse course, retreat to Council space." The order was given. What remained of the fleet turned and ran. They had arrived with 10,000 vessels and the absolute confidence of species who had ruled the galaxy for 12. They left with barely half their numbers and the terrifying knowledge that something had changed. The humans had not just fought back. They had developed weapons that made the Council's technology obsolete. They had hidden in the darkness for 2 centuries, building ships that should not exist, preparing for a moment that had finally arrived. On the Prometheus, Admiral watched the enemy retreat. Around him, his crew was silent. Some were crying. Others were praying. Many simply stared at their consoles, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. "Open a channel," ordered. "All frequencies. Make sure the entire galaxy hears this." The communications officer obeyed. Spoke carefully, knowing that his words would be analyzed and debated for centuries to come. "This is Admiral of the United Earth Stellar Command. The fleet has been defeated. Any further hostile action against human space will be met with the same response." He paused, letting the message sink in. "Humanity requests an audience with the Galactic Council. We have much to discuss regarding our future relationship. We will arrive at Nexus Prime in 3 days. We will not be asking twice." He ended the transmission and turned to. "Set course for Nexus Prime," he said. "It's time to show the Council what they've been dealing with." The dark matter fleet began to move. 200 impossible ships, carrying the hopes of a species that had refused to accept its place. They had proven that humanity was not what the galaxy believed it to be. Now, they would prove something even more important. They would prove that humanity was just getting started. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sections, but the usual murmur of conversation was absent. The clicking of the bioluminescent flashing of the crystalline resonance of the all silent. Every eye, every sensor, every attention was focused on the central platform. Ambassador Vance walked through the chamber with a different stride than before. She no longer bowed her head. She no longer kept her eyes down. She walked like a woman who carried the weight of her species' future on her shoulders and was proud to bear it. Behind her, holographic displays flickered to life, showing images that made the elder species shift uncomfortably in their seats. Ships that swallowed light, weapons that erased matter from existence. The dark matter fleet, revealed at last to the galaxy. High Arbiter stood at his traditional place in the center, but he seemed somehow diminished. His crystalline body, usually brilliant with refracted light, appeared dull. His posture, always perfect, showed the slightest slouch. He had received the reports from Fleet Commander N. He knew what had happened at the border. Stopped at the edge of the central platform. This time, she did not wait to be acknowledged. This time, she spoke first. High Arbiter, members of the Galactic Council, I am here to discuss new terms for humanity's relationship with this body. His voice, when he spoke, lacked its usual musical authority. You have made your point, Ambassador. Your weapons are impressive, but surely you understand that one victory does not change the fundamental balance of power in the galaxy. One victory, smiled, but there was no warmth in it. High Arbiter, your fleet was reduced by half in less than 2 hours. 5,000 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy were erased from existence, and we used barely a fraction of our capability. She gestured to the holographic display behind her. The image changed, showing a vast region of space between galaxies, empty according to traditional maps. But as the display enhanced and filtered, points of light began to appear, hundreds of them, then thousands. The ships you saw at the border were our first shadow fleet, said. 200 vessels. Impressive, certainly, but they represent only a small portion of what we have built. The display now showed 3,000 ships, 3,000 dark matter warships, hidden in the void between galaxies, invisible and untouchable. We have spent 200 years preparing for this moment, continued. Every ship you see is capable of the same destruction you witnessed. If we wished, we could end the Council's dominance in a matter of months. We could erase your fleets, your stations, your worlds. We could do to you what you threatened to do to us. She paused, letting the words sink in. But we do not wish to conquer, we wish to be heard. The chamber remained silent. The elder species, who had spent believing themselves supreme, could find no words to respond. Continued. We have 3 demands. First, humanity will be recognized as a full member of the Galactic Council, with voting rights equal to any other species. Second, all corrective integration protocols will be immediately suspended, not just against humanity, but against all species. Third, the Council will pay reparations for 2 centuries of economic sabotage and political isolation designed to keep humanity weak. These demands are outrageous, said General of the. His mandibles clicked angrily. You win one battle and think you can dictate terms to species who were exploring the stars when your ancestors were still living in caves. One battle, turned to face the delegation. Perhaps you would like to experience a second. I am sure we could arrange a demonstration for the fleet specifically, if you believe your ships would perform better than this. Fell silent, his mandibles stopped clicking. I thought not. Returned her attention to the High Arbiter. We do not make these demands out of arrogance, we make them because they are just. For 200 years, humanity has been treated as inferior. We have been mocked, exploited, and threatened with annihilation. We accepted this treatment because we had no choice. Now we have a choice, and we choose to be treated as equals. was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. How? The question has been burning in my mind since I received the reports. How did you do it? Dark matter cannot be harnessed. The mathematics forbid it. We have tried for 100,000 years. Our greatest scientists, our most advanced civilizations, all of us failed. How did humanity succeed where every other species failed? Nodded slowly. She had expected this question. She had prepared for it. You want to know our secret? I will tell you, but I warn you it is not a pleasant story. She touched a control on her personal device. The holographic display changed again. This time, it showed a timeline stretching back 200 years. Points of light marked significant events. Many of those points were accompanied by lists of names. Project Prometheus began in 2147, 1 year after first contact, said. Our leaders realized quickly that the Council would never accept humanity as equals. They saw what happened to the. They understood that any species that showed too much potential would be destroyed or absorbed. So they made a decision. They would develop technology that the Council could not match. Technology that would force the galaxy to treat humanity with respect. She pointed to the first few points on the timeline. The early years were the most difficult. We knew almost nothing about dark matter. Our experiments were crude. Our equipment was primitive. We made mistakes. The display showed images. A research station, its hull torn open by forces that should not exist. Emergency pods floating in space. Lists of names. The dead. Station Prometheus 1 was destroyed in 2152. 47 researchers died when an artificial singularity collapsed unexpectedly. We learned from their deaths and tried again. Another image, another destroyed station, more names. Station Prometheus 2 was destroyed in 2159, 83 dead. The singularity was more stable this time, but the containment field failed. We learned from their deaths and tried again. The images continued, station after station, experiment after experiment, each one ending in disaster, each one followed by another attempt. Over the first century of the project, we lost 11 stations and 4,217 researchers, men and women who knew they would probably die but volunteered anyway. They left families behind. They said goodbye to children they would never see grow up. They gave everything they had to a project that most of the galaxy said was impossible. His voice remained steady, but there was pain beneath the words. And we kept trying, because we had no choice, because the alternative was extinction, because our children deserved a future where they did not have to bow and scrape before species who saw them as nothing more than clever animals. The timeline moved forward. The disasters became less frequent. The breakthroughs became more significant. The lists of names grew shorter. In 2203, Dr. Sarah, Admiral's grandmother, made the critical discovery. She found a way to stabilize dark matter using quantum entanglement principles that our scientists had to invent from scratch. She died 6 months later from radiation exposure caused by her experiments, but her work allowed us to build the first stable dark matter containment field. More images, this time not of destruction but of construction, ships taking shape in hidden shipyards, weapons being tested in the void between galaxies. We built our first dark matter warship in 2267. It took another 50 years to build enough ships to challenge the Council. 50 years of secrecy. 50 years of hiding our true capabilities while we smiled and bowed and pretended to be harmless. Turn back to face the High Arbiter. You ask how we succeeded where you failed. The answer is simple. We did not stop. When our scientists died, we honored them and continued their work. When our stations were destroyed, we built new ones. When the mathematics said it was impossible, we changed the mathematics. We did not accept failure as an option because failure meant extinction. She stepped closer close enough to see the patterns of light within his crystalline body. Your species is old, High Arbiter. You have ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. You have everything you could ever want. You have no reason to struggle, no reason to sacrifice, no reason to push beyond what is comfortable and safe. You stopped trying because you did not need to try. We are young. We are small. We have nothing except our determination and our refusal to surrender. We built our fleet on a foundation of human lives, thousands of brilliant minds who died so that their descendants could stand here today and demand to be treated as equals. She straightened and addressed the entire chamber. That is our secret. That is how we did the impossible, not through superior intelligence or advanced technology, through sacrifice, through persistence, through the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that the universe has the right to tell us what we cannot do. The grand chamber remained silent. 47 species, some of them older than Earth's sun, had no response. They had seen the power of humanity's fleet. Now they understood the cost of that power. They understood that they were dealing with a species that had built its greatest achievement on a foundation of blood and grief and unbreakable will. High Arbiter stood motionless for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. You could have conquered us. With ships like that, you could have destroyed the Council and ruled the galaxy yourself. Why didn't you? His expression softened slightly. This was the question she had hoped he would ask. Because that is not who we are. We did not build those ships to rule. We built them so that no one would ever make us kneel again. There is a difference. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. We came here as enemies and were treated as inferiors. We do not want revenge for that treatment. We want something better. We want a galaxy where young species are not crushed because they show potential. We want a council that protects its members instead of exploiting them. We want a future where our children can look at the stars without fear. She returned her attention to, give us that future and we will be your allies. Give us a seat at this table and we will use our power to protect the innocent instead of conquering them. Treat us as equals and we will prove that we are worthy of that treatment. But if you refuse, if you try to take from us what we have earned, then we will teach you the same lesson we taught your fleet. And this time, we will not stop until every species in the galaxy understands that humanity will never kneel again. She fell silent. The chamber remained frozen. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. Then High Arbiter did something that no High Arbiter had done in 12,000 years of dominance. He bowed. Not a small bow, not a nod of acknowledgement. A full bow, deep and respectful, the kind of bow that is reserved for true equals. Humanity's demands will be presented to the full council for a vote, he said quietly. I will recommend approval. Felt tears forming in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Not yet. There would be time for emotion later. Thank you, High Arbiter, she said. Humanity is grateful for your wisdom. She turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving 47 species sitting in stunned silence behind her. The greatest powers in the galaxy had been shocked into wordless incomprehension by a young species they had dismissed as primitive and weak. The universe had changed, and humanity had changed it. 6 months had passed since humanity stood before the Galactic Council and demanded to be treated as equals. In that time, the galaxy had changed more than it had in the previous 1,000 years. The Terran Accords, as they came to be known, were by a unanimous vote, the first unanimous vote in Council history. Every species, from the ancient to the youngest probationary members, agreed that humanity deserved full membership. Some voted out of respect, others voted out of fear, but all of them voted yes. Ambassador Vance stood on a balcony overlooking the central plaza of Nexus Prime. Below her, representatives from dozens of species moved through the crowds. Some wore the crystalline armor of the elder races. Others wore simpler garments, marking them as members of the younger species who had long been ignored by the Council. Things were different now. Could see it in the way people walked, the way they talked, the way they looked at each other. The old hierarchy was crumbling. The assumption that some species were naturally superior to others was being questioned for the first time in. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see a familiar figure approaching. High Arbiter moved slowly across the balcony, his crystalline body catching the light from distant stars. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, though new that did not age in the same way humans did. "Ambassador," he said, "I hoped I would find you here." "High Arbiter, this is an unexpected honor." "Please," raised a hand. "After everything that has happened, I think we can dispense with formal titles. My name is, you may use it." Nodded slowly. For it to offer their personal name to a member of another species was significant. It meant he was accepting her as an equal in more than just political terms. "Then you must call me." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the crowds below. "I have been thinking," said finally, "about what you said in the council chamber, about why your species built those ships, about why you did not use them to conquer us. And what conclusions have you reached?" The ancient was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than had ever heard it. "My species has ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. In that time, we have seen countless younger species rise and fall. Most of them followed the same pattern. They developed technology, grew ambitious, challenged our dominance, and were defeated. Some were absorbed into our civilization. Others were destroyed. A few were simply forgotten." He turned to face directly. "We told ourselves that this was the natural order, that some species were meant to rule and others were meant to serve, that our dominance was proof of our superiority. We believed this so completely that we stopped questioning it. We stopped growing. We stopped trying to be better than we were." "And then humanity arrived," said. "Yes, and you showed us something we had forgotten. You showed us what a species can accomplish when it refuses to accept limitations, when it is willing to sacrifice everything for a goal that matters, when it has something to prove." His crystalline body shifted, colors moving beneath the surface like thoughts becoming visible. "I am 12,000 years old. I have seen things that your species cannot imagine, but I have never seen anything like what humanity has done. You built the impossible because you refused to believe it was impossible. You turned your own weakness into your greatest strength." "We had help," said. "Thousands of people gave their lives for this. Scientists, engineers, soldiers. They knew they would probably die, but they did it anyway. We did not build our fleet alone. We built it on the backs of our heroes. That is what makes your achievement so remarkable. The elder species have forgotten how to sacrifice. We have forgotten how to struggle. We have become so comfortable in our power that we have lost the ability to risk everything for something greater than ourselves." Looked out at the stars. So many points of light, each one representing countless possibilities. "What will you do now?" she asked. "The old order is changing. The council cannot go back to the way things were." "No, it cannot." His voice held a note of something that might have been hope, but perhaps that is not a bad thing. Perhaps it is time for the galaxy to remember what growth looks like, what ambition feels like, what it means to reach for something beyond our grasp. He turned to face the plaza below, where young species walked alongside their elders without bowing or lowering their eyes. "Humanity has given us a gift, not your weapons or your technology, something more valuable. You have reminded us that the universe is not finished, that there are still discoveries to be made, challenges to overcome, heights to reach. You have reminded us how to dream." Felt tears forming in her eyes. She had spent her entire career being dismissed and mocked by species like the. To hear one of their greatest leaders speak this way was almost more than she could process. "Thank you, that means more than you know." The ancient nodded and walked away, leaving alone with her thoughts. Across the galaxy, the changes continued. Species that had been ignored began reaching out to humanity. Messages arrived at Earth from 100 different worlds, all carrying the same basic content: hope. The scattered and broken after their corrective integration centuries ago sent a delegation to Earth. They had heard what humanity had accomplished. They wanted to know if there was hope for their own species to reclaim what had been taken from them. Admiral met with them personally. He sat across from their leader, an old female named whose eyes held the weight of generations of suffering. "We cannot undo what was done to your people," told her. "We cannot give you back the centuries you lost, but we can offer you something else." "What?" asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "A future. The Council has agreed to suspend all corrective integration protocols. Your people are free to rebuild, to recover what was taken, to become what you were meant to be." Stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, tears began to fall from her ancient eyes. "For 300 years, we have had nothing but memories and grief. We told our children stories about what we used to be, knowing they would never see it for themselves. And now you tell us that it is not over, that we can still become something. I am telling you that you were never nothing," reached across the table and took her hand. "You were a proud species that was crushed by those who feared your potential. That was not justice. That was not the natural order. That was oppression, and it ends today." Similar meetings happened across the galaxy. Humanity became a beacon for the forgotten and the oppressed. Species that had been dismissed as inferior came to Earth seeking guidance and support. They found doors that had been closed for suddenly opening. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Some of the elder species resisted, clinging to their old privileges and assumptions. In particular, struggled to accept their reduced status. General led a faction that demanded the Council take action against humanity, arguing that allowing a young species to dictate terms was an unacceptable violation of tradition. But his demands fell on deaf ears. The other elder species had seen what happened to the fleet. They knew what humanity was capable of. More importantly, they were beginning to understand that the old ways had led them to stagnation and decay. Change was necessary, even if it was uncomfortable. In the void territories, where humanity's dark matter fleet had been built in secret, a new kind of construction was. Admiral stood on the observation deck of a massive shipyard, watching the skeleton of a ship take shape. Captain stood beside him, studying the blueprints on her personal display. "She's going to be beautiful," she said. "What are we calling her?" "The UES Discovery," smiled. "Our first dedicated exploration vessel, dark matter engines capable of traveling beyond the galaxy's edge. We've spent 200 years building weapons. Now it's time to build something else." The Council approved it. Unanimously. They're actually contributing resources. They are providing crystalline hull plating. They are designing the life support systems. Even they offered their expertise in sensor technology, though I think they mostly wanted to make sure they could track where we're going. Laughed. "Old habits." Indeed, turned away from the window. But habits can change, even old ones. On Earth, the celebrations continued. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged victorious. They had built the impossible and used it not to conquer, but to demand justice. They had proven that a species' worth was not measured by its age or its size, but by its determination and its dreams. In schools across the planet, children learned about Project Prometheus and the heroes who had made it possible. They learned the names of scientists who had died in pursuit of the impossible. They learned about the sacrifices that had built their future. And they learned the most important lesson of all, that the universe does not decide what is possible. Humans decide, and humans never stop reaching for the stars. Vance retired from diplomatic service 3 years after the Terran Accords. She had given her life to representing humanity among species that had despised her people. Now, she wanted to rest. She returned to Earth and bought a small house on the coast of what used to be Portugal. She spent her days watching the ocean and her nights watching the stars. Sometimes, old friends would visit. Sometimes, she would receive messages from young diplomats asking for advice. She answered them all, sharing whatever wisdom she had gathered over her long career. One evening, a diplomat named Elle came to visit. She was young by standards, barely 500 years old. She had been one of the loudest voices opposing humanity during the crisis. Now, she had been assigned to Earth as a cultural liaison. "Ambassador Vance," she said, her mandibles clicking nervously, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" asked. She gestured for her guest to sit. "For not doing what we would have done." Elle settled onto a specially designed chair. "When humanity revealed its fleet, I was certain you would attack. I was certain you would do to us what we had threatened to do to you. I spent the entire council session preparing for war. And now I am here, on your home world, being treated as a guest instead of an enemy. I am learning your culture, your history, your art. I am seeing things I never expected to see." Smiled, "And what do you see?" Elle was quiet for a moment. Her compound eyes reflected the light from the setting sun. "I see a species that had every reason to hate us, every reason to destroy us. And instead, you chose to reach out, to build bridges instead of weapons, to prove that you were better than we ever gave you credit for." She turned to face directly. "I asked my commander a question back when we were preparing for war. I asked why humans didn't simply conquer the galaxy when they had the chance. He had no answer. Now I think I understand." "Tell me," said. "You remember what it felt like to be small, to be weak, to look up at the stars and feel fear. You built those ships so that you would never feel that way again, but you did not use them to make others feel that way, because you knew what it was like, because you chose to be different." Looked out at the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and red. "When I was a young diplomat," she said slowly, "I spent a lot of time being afraid of the elder species, afraid of what they would do to us, afraid that everything my people had built would be swept away by forces we could not control." She turned back to her guest. "And then I realized something. Fear is not a weakness. Fear is a gift. It reminds us what we have to lose. It drives us to protect what matters. The species that forget fear are the ones who become complacent, who stop growing, who lose their way." "Humanity never forgot fear," Elle said. "No, we didn't. And that's why we built the impossible. Not because we were strong, because we knew we were weak, and we refused to accept that weakness as permanent." They sat together in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Two species that had once been enemies, now trying to understand each other. The stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with light. Somewhere out there, the UES Discovery was making its final preparations. In a few weeks, it would leave the galaxy entirely, traveling to places no one from the Council had ever visited. Humanity was reaching for the unknown, just as it always had. The universe had underestimated them once. It had tried to crush them, to limit them, to tell them they were nothing more than clever animals who had stumbled into space by accident. It had been wrong. And as the first truly crew prepared to venture beyond the galaxy's edge, humanity proved once again that there was no limit to what they could achieve. No limit except the ones they refused to accept. The stars waited, and humanity was ready.